In this drawing, we're going to be using sight measuring a great deal. So if you haven't yet watched the video in sketchbook number 3 assignment, you should go back and watch that first. I'm holding up my sighting stick to measure the full height of the composition from the lowest part, which is the bottom of the spoon, to the upper part, which is the top of the wine bottle. This gives me a unit of measurement. Keeping my thumb in place to hold that unit of measurement, I turn my hand sideways and compare that measurement against the width of the composition. I find in doing this that the overall composition is about twice as wide as it is high, or it has a ratio of about 2 to 1 if we were to look at the overall composition. Keeping in mind that 2 to 1 ratio, I'm going to start blocking in the drawing by marking off the farthest edges from left to right, so that I don't want anything in my composition to go off the page on either the left or right side. Next, I'm going to draw a long horizontal line through the center of the page. This will help me when I block in the drawing align the objects correctly using that central horizontal axis line. I'm also going to draw quickly in a long vertical axis line down the center, which similarly will help me line up these objects. Remembering that this is twice as wide as it is high, I'm going to then measure that and mark off the maximum top and bottom of the composition so that nothing goes over the top or the bottom lines that I've just drawn. Now that I'm ready to block in the drawing, I'm going to find again what was near the vertical center of the still life. And I'm remembering it is basically the farthest right apple in that bowl that's next to the wine bottle is more or less in the center of the drawing. I now have a good place to start the blocking in of the objects in the drawing with the central large bowl and also the wine bottle. And these lines I'm using are largely long organizational lines. On the bowl, I'm drawing in a little bit of the oval shape of the mouth of it, but just enough to help me visualize as I keep blocking in the objects that I'm seeing. After loosely sketching in those 3 central objects, I'm holding my sighting stick up to the angle of that bottom object in the still life and matching it and quickly sketching in the angle that I find. Having sketched in the lowest object in the composition, I'm going to continue to flesh out the right side by measuring in and blocking in the farthest right object, which is the wine glass, and I'm just going to very loosely and quickly block it in at this point before moving on. At this point, as I move to the left side of the composition, I want to quickly check some proportions. So I'm going to use the wine bottle as a unit of measure. I'm marking my thumb off at the bottom of the stick to find the top to bottom of the wine bottle. I'm then going to turn my hand to the side and measure that wine bottle dimension compared to the width of the bowl. Finding that the bowl is as wide as the wine bottle is tall, I check the measurements of what I've drawn and find them to be accurate, so I can then quickly flesh out the rest of the width of the bowl, and I put a little axis point at the center to help me give a little bit more clarity to it. I then continue to flesh out the rest of the composition. I note that the width of the small box on the left is about the same width of the red onion and the wine glass on the right, which allows me to quickly sketch in approximately where that should be. Now that I have all the items blocked in, I'm going to get more specific, and I'm going to start with the bowl. I'm going to check the height of the bowl, and then I'm going to compare it to the width. I find that the width of the bowl is about 2 times the height, or a ratio of 2 to 1. So I can go in and check what I've drawn and replicate that ratio of it being twice as wide as it is high. And I'm doing this with basically drawing a box structure around it first, and then drawing the oval and rounded shapes inside of that. I'm also noticing that the edge of the top part of the bowl is about halfway up the height, and this will help me finalize the final proportional relationships. Here's a closer view of using those organizational lines to draw an oval shape like the bowl. You'll notice the beginning straight lines, vertical and horizontal, are really loose and light, and I basically use that as an armature to sketch in the oval and elliptical shapes. In finalizing the placement and proportions of the wine bottle, I'm going to go in and reinforce some of the central axis lines, and the curve that forms that elegant top part of the body. I've noticed that if I draw through it and draw a circle and then connect that to the stem, I get a smooth and elegant transition, and these are one of the compound shapes that we talked about earlier. After blocking in all the drawings from left to right, I'm moving down and addressing the spoon that's laying at the front of the composition. Even though it's a very thin object, keep in mind things like these still have dimension that you should block in. Effectively, it's like a very elongated rectangle for the hand with an elliptical shape for the spoon, head of the spoon. So in the last few minutes as you're finishing up the drawing, go through and just make small, fine adjustments, and also do things like accentuating certain line weights to create a fuller sense of volume and dimension in the drawing, and keep as many of the lines as possible, especially those light beginning organizational line. Avoid erasing anything if possible, as I want to see the full process of your making the drawing.